Good morning. How's everyone doing today? Very well. The service went a little bit long. We had their first ministry minute, so a couple people might trickle in, but I'm also thinking that some people might not be quite up to reading all the books in the whole series, maybe. It is a challenge. It is a challenge. But I hope you do feel like even if you don't know the story, he gives you enough so that you can still engage with it in a way that's helpful and revealing. So today we are in the fourth session, and again, our speaker is Terry Lindvall. The book that we're talking about today is called The Horse and His Boy, and next week is going to be The Silver Chair. So just to make sure that's clear for everyone, I apologize. I seem like no matter what I say, I make a mistake and I do something wrong, and so Horse and His Boy this week. Next week is The Silver Chair. And just in case anyone's curious, the book that he keeps on referencing by Michael Ward, Planet Narnia, is here. I'll have it up here, so if you want to take a look at it. It's a bit more academic, but it's very interesting if you're curious about some of these details that he's mentioning briefly in the videos in much more detail. Any questions about what you've done so far? For those of you who read, any favorite parts or anything like that you want to share before we begin? Art already mentioned one about the way he's fascinated by the way Lewis, because it's a children's story, is able to portray warfare and battles, but do so in a way that's not, too much for children, basically, which is true. So, all right. Well, without further ado.
Welcome to Narnia for Grown-Ups. Today we're looking at one of Lewis's odd stories, The Horse and His Boy. And basically it's a side story of Narnia. When you look at the Bible, you have stories like Ruth and Esther that are not really kind of part of the whole narrative of the kingdom, even though God is working through kind of both of these women characters. But it's a side story that we're getting. And what Lewis is going to really emphasize in here is how everyone's story is important. No matter if you're a poor slave or a shy horse, we're all called to be royal children of Aslan. Now, his publisher, Geoffrey Blest, really didn't like the original title of Narnia in the North. They didn't really know what it was going to refer to. So Lewis kind of offered, how about The Horse and His Boy? And at that time, there was a strong kind of pony book public, stories about horses and girls like National Velvet. And so they thought, okay, let's do something with the horse. And so some of the titles that came out, one was Over the Border, or The Desert Road to Narnia, or Core of Archenland, that was killed immediately. The Horse Stole His Boy, became fascinating. Bless liked best The Horse and the Boy, but he recommended changing one pronoun, The Horse and His Boy, because it startles just a little bit. It conveys the idea of Lewis's other title, The Horse Stole the Boy. Now, in the first sense, this book is like a lost foundling. It's like, who is this? The question of identity. And very much like Moses set afloat in a basket discovered by Pharaoh's daughter, we don't know who Shasta is in the beginning, or Oliver Twist, an orphan. Who is he? What is the backstory there? And so we've got several parts we're going to look at here. First, there is the story of Shasta, who lives with his adopted father, a fisherman, and a Tarkin knight who comes to buy him. This is essentially for Lewis an Arabian Night tale. He told his illustrator, the young Pauline Baynes, to go to Arabian Nights or go to Babylon or Persepolis as conceived by Herodotus in the Old Testament for inspiration. So she would look particularly at Arabian Nights to get images for her drawings. And he really liked some of her kind of sketches of a young woman in her litter, or Shasta the hero among tombs in the desert, or Rabidash the villain who hangs on a rock hook and he turns into an ass. In fact, Lewis would take a magnifying glass to look at the details of a picture like this, where you see the city of Tashbaan. And it is one of the archetypes that Lewis gives in the book. Jungian archetypes of the desert, of city, of garden, all come together. But here he presents the city in a really kind of perverse way. He has a very low opinion of cities. Doesn't want to go to London at all. Likes Oxford. It's a great place to stay. And it's reflected in Tashbaan with all of its busyness. It's loud. It's crowds. Everything else. And it smells. even though it has some lovely gardens and fountains and everything else, it still stinks. And Lewis writes, "What you have noticed, if you had been there, were the smells which came from unwashed people, unwashed dogs, scent, garlic, onions, and piles of refuse which lay everywhere." Now, Lewis had been accused, particularly in this book, of sexism, Islamophobia, and racism, and some other kind of faults. But if you begin to look at Lewis's sources, it begins to explain a lot of things. But first, look at two of his female characters. Lasaroline is a young, silly, empty-headed, fatuous little teenage girl. She'll become one of the housewives of Tashbaan. She's more like a Kardashian who loves kind of frilly things and silks and parties and all of those kinds of things, or like the women of Isaiah 3 who just want to buy things and make themselves pretty. However, Aravind, and focused, intelligent woman. She is the leader of the four characters that are going to move up Narnia, towards Narnia in the north. And so this book kind of contrasts these two kinds of women. It just doesn't put women in this really kind of silly mode, but we see the vain and the selfish Lazareline, and we see her very spoiled with material desires and trying to impress other people. But we see also Aravis, who shows now, when it comes to looking at Islam and realize that he had a knowledge of, he pulls from it this one basic tenet. The Muslim who believes Muhammad, the prophets could be Moses, it could be the Psalms of David, and even the Gospels of Jesus Christ. These are scriptures and they prophets, but they're corrupted. The problem with these, according to the Quran, is that they are not the Quran. The Quran is the only uncorrupted, incorruptible book that is around. It is God. They worship God is in the book. And so it comes and it supersedes all the others and puts them in perspective. In fact, if you notice that Jesus and Mary, the mother of God, are mentioned quite a bit in the Quran, but Muhammad is only mentioned about 3 times. But Jesus does not go to the cross. Somebody takes his place, because we find that Islam has problems with the incarnation. They cannot believe that God could become a man. They will not allow that God has descended into the flesh. And so Lewis is very clever at this. Uses the Turkish name for lion, Aslan, as the incarnation of the second person of the Trinity. However, according to Muslim tradition, God couldn't even become a real lion. He couldn't become a real man or a real lion. But Lewis kind of turns this upside down and begins to plant in the imagination that God can become a man, even as the emperor across the sea can become a lion in Narnia. One of the other kind of key moments of defense of Lewis is that one of his friends, he converted to Islam in the late 1930s. Lings was an undergraduate tutee of Lewis at Magdalen College, and they did remain lifelong friends even after Ling's conversion. In fact, in a book written long after Lewis had died called We Remember C.S. Lewis, Ling contributes a chapter that venerates him, the man, and a debt repaid. He says he praised his professor, who did not force his own beliefs on him, but understood and respected and would question and talk to him about his own kind of mental and spiritual journey. And so there was respect by Lewis for this, but at the same time, he could not accept certain tenets of that faith. But then how do we understand the depiction of Tizrak, or Rabadash, the villain, or the vizier, or Tash, this kind of demon god of the Calmarines? We must go to Lewis's sources. And Lewis's sources were not Disney movies like Arabian Nights or Aladdin. He went to the original 1001 Nights. Here we find stories within stories, and very few people have read 1001 Nights. They may have read Sinbad or Aladdin or Alibaba, but they haven't read some of the more violent and erotic and dangerous stories that are there. In fact, if you look at the backdrop to the Arabian Nights, there's a story of Scheherazade having her 1001 Nights with the Sultan. Now, this is kind of she creates these dazzling, exotic, cliffhanging stories, because what had happened was the Sultan came back to his palace one night to fetch something he had left behind, and he found his wife sleeping in bed with an Ethiopian slave. And so he's betrayed, and he's angry, and he goes with his brother, another Shah, whose wife had done the same thing. And they come across a sleeping genie who had taken a beautiful woman captive. And she threatens to wake up the genie to punish them unless they have sex with her. And this angers both of the sultans, so that the first Shah swears off women. But our Shah says, I am going to bring revenge on the head of every woman. And so he's decided to marry a new bride every night and execute her the first thing in the morning before she could cheat on him. Now, his grand vizier, his officer of state, his daughter is named Scheherazade, or Shahrazad. She was well known for her talent of storytelling. So she decides to marry the Sultan knowing what he's been doing, and she's probably the last virgin alive in all of Persia. But she conspires to begin an amusing or a suspenseful story every night. But she never ends it before daybreak. Thus she leaves the king enthralled. He's engrossed in every word, and he gives her an extra day and to spare her life, because he wants to find out what's going to happen. Hence, when she finishes the tale, never at daybreak, she quickly starts another equally captivating tale, which will go on for another night. And so he has this strategy day after day, night after night, for 1001 nights, until finally the king is cured of his paranoia, and he realizes that this is a good woman, this storyteller, and he wants to keep her as his queen forever. Now, other critics have complained of Lewis, his fat hatred, and his body shaming of people with humpbacks. But this modernist critique shows that these people have not read Arabian Nights. The Arabian Nights makes fun of and mocks kind of fatness and degrades hunchback servants. And Lewis is borrowing such tropes from the hunchback cycle in 1001 Tales. He also follows the pattern of language, where the Arabian Nights would have phrases like, in the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful, or there is no power or no strength except with Allah, at the beginning of the Persian stories, emphasizing the kind of Islamic cultural context. Lewis creates his own similar kind of trope. He says, inserts, my dear Tizrock, may he live forever, just kind of capturing the spirit of the Arabian Nights throughout all the Calmarines conversations. So the language and the storytelling, the characters, all derive from a Persian influence. In fact, if you listen to some of the language, Father Tizrak talks to his son Rabadash. May the strength of Tash, the inexorable, the irresistible, be in your sword and your lance, a blessing for jihad, for this kind of holy war. And as you remember, the Muslims in the 6th century basically crossed all across the northern coast of Africa, up through Spain and into France, and really brought their kind of holy war there. Islam means submission. It was called to hear and to obey. And so it conjures up this kind of total war and total compliance that is there. The Grand Vizier is very much like an Ottoman or a Turkish leader. And we find this very obsequious fawning sycophant, this person who basically sucks up to the Shah. And his name is Ashosta, and he crawls backwards on all four, and he's continually muttering, to hear is to obey, to hear is to obey. So that we get the background of the Arabian Nights. But part 2 shows us the planetary influence of Mercury. And about 3.5 years ago, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury came together. Not that it matters, but I just thought it was interesting. Michael Ward says that the planet that really influenced this one was Mercury, or Quicksilver. And we're going to get a sense of how Quicksilver separates and comes together, which is what these pilgrims do throughout. They kind of separate for a while, then they come back together, they travel together, they separate again, and it's very much like Mercury. Mercury is also the god of commerce, and we find that the first action concerning Shasta is when he overhears his stepfather, the fisherman, bartering with a Tarkhan warrior for his services. And he realizes he's been traded about like some piece of cheap goods. And so he wants to escape. And that's when he meets Bree, the talking horse from Narnia, and they decide to go north. Mercury is also marked by luck, trickery, mischief, and theft. And so Erebus thinks that everything happening to them is luck, that Mercury is behind it. But she soon showed that it's Providence as well. Rabbadash practiced trickery and when he wants to attack Archenland. Shasta and Bree argue about whether it's right to raid, to steal, to take booty as thieves. Mercury is also the god of travelers and wandering. And if you remember, he is fashioned with winged sandals, kind of the talaria, and a winged helmet, all connoting speed. The groom here makes haste to leave the tombs. The river rapids flow swiftly. The group always goes fast, and then a lion, swift of foot, appears. Rabbadash proclaims that nothing matters but speed in attacking King Loon's castle. And if you remember the Gospel of Mark, in that Gospel, everything is always happening immediately. And so Mercury is kind of the planet behind this whole book. Speed is the essence of Mercury, swift of foot and as the fleet-footed messenger of the gods, with wings on his cap. In fact, at one point, we find a Narnian appears wearing a silver cap with little wings on each side of it. He is Mercury. Here in this little kind of drawing, you notice the speed of Mercury to compare to everything else. And it's the speed of a granddaughter. When you get a 14-month who's just learned to walk, she becomes Mercury, quicksilver all over the house. Now, like Mercury, the lion accelerates the speed of the travelers. His presence is like the Holy Spirit, prompting, guiding, prodding, getting them to move, and protecting them from danger. Mercury is also marked by twins and by twos. If you notice in your reading, there are 2 armies, 2 peaks, 2 mountains, 2 slaves, 2 lumps of sugar for the horses, a 2-headed giant, and dedicated to 2 brothers, David and Douglas Gresham. We find identical twins are separated at birth, and they're going to be reunited, which is the main plot. In fact, Kor and Corin, Shasta, also reflect the twins of Gemini. Remember, Gemini is ruled by Mercury, the constellation. And these 2 twins of Gemini are Castor and Pollux, the great myth story of these 2. And of the Gemini twins, Castor is Shasta, a breaker of horses. He's a horse boy. He will break Bree's pride and self-conceit. And Pollux, who is Corin, is basically a renowned boxer. And so Castor and Pollux serve as twin models for Kor, Shasta, and Corin. Like Pollux the boxer, the second twin, Corin, gets a black eye because he's pummeling a boy who insults Queen Susan. Then he beats up the boy's brother. Then he beats up the first boy again. He loves to box. Corin is also known as Thunderfist, and he even wants to box Rabbadash at the end of the book. The book tells us no one could ever equal Corin as a boxer, who boxed the Lap's bear of Stormness. When he jumps into the narrative with a loud crash, Shasta is desperate to get away, but Corin says, "Hey, why are you in such a hurry? Look, we're twins. We can get a lot of fun out of this being mistaken for one another." And so he shows some of the mischief of Mercury. But for Lewis, he is an avatar of unbridled joy. He is the boxer, full of energy, and he is quick as a bumblebee and as powerful as, I forget the old Muhammad Ali thing, but you understand. Twins are separated at birth and reunited is the story of things from Mark Twain, The Prince and the Pauper. Or you can find it in the story of The Parent Trap, whether it's with Haley Mills or Lindsay Lohan from 61 to 98. There's a lot of mischief there of these 2 twins coming together and being reunited at the end. Or in Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger, the unlikely set of twins who are also brought together at the end. But none of them compare to Teresa Joy and Terrence Roy Lindvall, my twin sister and me, kind of chubby little Swedish children. Mercury then finally is also the god of language, of written and oral communication, of eloquence, and mostly of storytelling, with the special skills of speech. One can contrast the rhetorical style of the Narnians, who are lavish and eloquent and articulate, with the Calmarines, who are really kind of very dull with other proverbs. Of course, Lewis writes in an aside that the poetry of the Calmarines sounds like essays, or if you brought them up today, it would look like PowerPoints. They're really tedious, and it takes forever to get through them. Mercury or Hermes is that messenger or that angel of the gods who gives us hermeneutics, the art of interpretation. When the 4 children reach the hermit, he asks, who will take the messenger? Remember, St. Paul is also called Hermes or Mercury in Lystra in Acts 14 as the messenger or the angel of gods. And here in this kind of painting by Raphael, the Sacrifice at Lystra, you can find Mercury with his little winged hat and his winged shoes in the background. And it's a story of Paul and Barnabas, Mercury and Zeus. The speech of Mercury could be fool's talk, like the boring, long-winded, and vapid proverbs of the Calmarines. Arshish drones on, and some of his proverbs are so dull and so strange. He would say, natural affection is stronger than soup, and offspring more precious than carbuncles. Who knows what he's meaning? Or the Tisroc, desist from kicking the venerable enlightened vizier, for as a costly jewel retains its value even hidden in a dunghill, so old age and discretion are to be respected even in the vile persons of our subjects. Or as the Russians would say, real Russians have no proverbs. We have vodka and misery. The possible language of the Calmarines, here's an actual quote, which is probably typical of all politicians. It says, the problem of solving a problem is not a problem, but when a problem solves a problem without any problem, then the problem is not a problem at all. That sounds like a Calmarine to me. But you compare it to the pithy and witty Narnian proverbs, like, come and live with me and you'll know me. Or, if you do one good deed, your reward usually is to do another and harder one. Or, onward and upward, to Narnia and the north, all great memorizable proverbs. But you look at the dull rhetoric of the Calmarines. In Archenland, when a bard steps forth to sing his ballads, rockets shoot off in the imagination of people when you hear his imagery. So Mercury is that planet of storytelling, unique stories. Erebus will tell her story, and Shasta, Kor, is really embarrassed to tell his story, and so others will tell it for him. But as Lewis says at the end, no one is told any story but their own, even if we are nosy about others. So first we had the story of the Arabian Nights, then we had the metaphor of Mercury, and now some brief bits. Narnia in the North. If you go to the Bible Museum up in Washington, D.C., the Logos Theater, they've been putting on plays like this, plays like The Horse and His Boy. And they take you on the trip from down south to Calmarine all the way up through Archenland to Narnia. Now we find a conversation that's very kind of clever between Shasta and Erebus. And he says to her, did your horse just talk? And she responds curtly, what's it got to do with you if she did? Why, you're only a girl, he discovers. And what business of that is yours if I'm only a girl? You're probably only a boy, and a slave probably, who's stolen his master's horse. Shows how little you know. Bree, his horse, says, well, he's not a thief, little Tarkina. At least, if there's any stealing, you might as well say I stole him. Erebus, oh, Hwin, that's her horse. I wish you'd held your tongue. Now look at the trouble you've gotten us into. Shasta, well, you can clear off now as soon as you like. We shan't keep you. Oh, no, you shan't, says Erebus. Bree looks at the other horse, Hwin, and says, what a quarrelsome creatures these humans are. Yes, they're as bad as mules, she said. Now Shasta comes about to wonder who he is among all these travelers, these Narnians, these real Narnians. Who am I becomes his dominant quest, trying to discover who he is. And he finds out at the end that he's actually the son of a king. And here we get for Lewis a hint of the numinous, something that is so terrifying, something so tremendous and mysterious and fascinating. It is what Rudolf Otto called the idea of the holy. And when he is out among these tombs, these gravestones at the desert, that he gets the sense that there's something greater in life than he ever has realized. And here we also get the first moment in the Narnian Chronicles that is explicitly Trinitarian. And when Shasta asks this voice that's out there, "Who are you?" it answers 3 times, "Myself, myself, myself." It is loud, it is clear, and it is whispered. And it is the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And all 3 of them set the trembling over him that Shasta realizes there is something greater than he had ever imagined in this voice that's out there. And he does not yet know whom Aslan is. And so in this story, there's neither destiny nor luck. But Lewis writes, for a Christian, there are, strictly speaking, no chances. There is a secret master of ceremonies at work, and God works behind the scenes incognito in every message of crisis. "I am the unluckiest person alive," he says to Aslan, the lion. "I do not call you unfortunate, my son. What was bad luck to meet so many lions anyway?" "There was only one lion," says Aslan, "but he was swift of foot." "How do you know?" "I was the lion. I was the lion who forced you to join with Aravis. I was the cat who comforted you among the houses of the dead. I was the lion who drove the jackals from you while you slept. I was the lion who gave the horses the new strength of fear for the last mile, so that you could reach King Lune in time. And I was the lion you do not remember, who pushed the boat in which you lay, a child." Judgment allows us, says Lewis, to become what we choose to be. Rabadash chooses to act very foolhardily and in a foolish way becomes an ass. Lewis suggests that our small sins will grow over eternity into something horrific, as with Nebuchadnezzar, the king, who went out into the field like a donkey to eat grass, and other characters that we know. For example, we remember the story of Apuleius' story of Lucius, who becomes the golden ass, or more familiar, Pinocchio on Pleasure Island becomes a donkey. Now, when it comes to the 4 loves, we find Shasta and Bree become friends. They share philia because they have a common interest of going to Narnia in the north. The 2 women, Aravis and Hwin, develop a female friendship of philia, of friendship that Lewis would call it, as they share sufferings and they share hopes. Hwin had thwarted Aravis's attempted suicide by sharing good news with her. And so we have these 4 pilgrims together who come together, and they each bring something out of the other that no one else can. And so of the 4, as they travel together, they share philia, and over time they have storge, this love of familiarity. But a third kind of love that Lewis talks about is eros. And eros goes bad in the character of Rashadash. He wants Queen Susan. "I must have her," he cries. "I shall die if I don't get her. False, proud, black-hearted daughter of a dog that she is. I cannot sleep, and my food has no savor, and my eyes are darkened because of her beauty. I must have the barbarian queen." However, philia may slip into good eros and eventually marriage. But first it must overcome pride and prejudice. We're going to find that Shasta and Aravis, whose conversation we just heard, where they kind of snap at each other, have to overcome their pride and prejudice, which leads us to Lewis's borrowing from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Aravis, however, resembles the proud Darcy and looks down at Shasta as this kind of common boy. And so as Darcy, she's essentially saying, "Miss Elizabeth, I have struggled in vain, and I can bear it no longer. These past months have been a torment. I came to Rosings with the single object of seeing you. I had to see you. I have fought against my better judgment, my family's expectations, the inferiority of your birth, by rank and circumstances. All these things I am willing to put aside and ask you to end my agony and marry me." And she responds, "And those are the words of a gentleman? From the very first moment I met you, your arrogance and your conceit. Your selfish disdain for the feelings of others made me realize that you were the last man in the world I could ever be prevailed upon to marry. And so her pride and prejudice against someone seemingly superior almost derails a true romance with Mr. Darcy. But he also needs to learn humility. Jane Austen writes, I could easily forgive his pride if he had not mortified mine. And so both of them are proud, both of them are prejudiced, and both of them have to overcome it by acknowledging that they love each other and humbling themselves. And so that happens as well with Aravis and Shastas. And as Lewis writes at the end, Aravis also had many quarrels, and I'm afraid even fights, with Cor, but they always made it up again. So that years later, when they were grown up, they were so used to quarreling and making it up again that they got married so as to go on doing it more conveniently. And so Lewis is very perceptive about how we can argue so much, and then we get married and we love each other and we keep doing it conveniently. Finally, the last love after Storge, Phileo, and Eros is agape. And Bree does not believe in a lion. And first he starts off, well, no doubt, when they speak of Aslan as a lion, they only mean he's as strong as a lion or is as fierce as a lion. There's some spirit of it, it's spiritual, or something of that kind. But even a little girl like you, Aravis, must see that it would be quite absurd to suppose that he is an actual real lion. Indeed, it would be disrespectful. If he were a lion, he'd have to be a beast, just like the rest of us. Why? And here Bree begins to laugh. If he were a lion, he'd have 4 paws, and a tail, and whiskers, and here, help! For just as he had said the word whiskers, one of Aslan's had actually tickled his ear. Bree shot away like an arrow to the other side of the enclosure, and there turned. The wall was too high for him to jump, and he could fly no further. Aravis and Hwin both started back, and there was about a second of intense silence. What we find here is that Hwin, shaking all over, gives a strange little neigh and trots over to the lion. Please, she said, you're so beautiful. You may eat me if you like. I'd sooner be eaten by you than by anyone else. And Aslan looks at the sweet, humble horse and says, dearest daughter, putting a kiss on her twitching velvet nose, I knew you would not be long in coming to me, and joy shall be yours. But he lifts his head and he speaks in a louder voice to Bree. Now Bree is very much like St. Thomas, who doubted the resurrection of Jesus Christ and said, I've got to see it. I've got to put my hand in his side and feel the nail prints in his hand and his feet. And so Aslan says to Bree, you poor, proud, frightened horse, draw near, near still, my son. Do not care not to dare. Touch me, smell me. Here are my paws, here is my tail, there are my whiskers, I am true beast. Aslan, said Bree in a shaken voice, I'm afraid I must be rather a fool. Happy the horse who knows that while he is still young, or the human either. Draw near, Aravis, my daughter. You see my paws are velveted. You will not be scratched this time. This time, sir, said Aravis, for Aravis had been scratched by the lion on her flight out of Tashbaan. And now Aslan explains why. It was I who wounded you, said Aslan. I am the only lion you met in all your journeys. Do you know why I scratched and tore you? No, sir. The scratches on your back, tear for tear, throb for throb, blood for blood, were equal to the stripes laid on the back of your stepmother's slave because of the drugged sleep you cast upon her. You needed to know what it felt like. Oh, yes, sir, please. Go on, my dear. And what will become harm to her by what I did? Child, said the lion, I am telling you your story, not hers. No one is told any story but their own. And so the Lord disciplines those whom he loves. He chastises every son that he receives. And no, Peter, when he saw the Lord, asked about John. He says, Lord, what about him? And the Lord says, I'm not going to tell you his story. I'm only here to tell you yours. And so he tells us. He is not going to tell us anyone else's story. He is going to tell us ours. And so at the end, you have these four kinds of love: storge, philos, eros, and agape. All of them come together to feast, to sing, to eat, to drink. And all of them have love in Archenland. There are four kinds of love that are there. And so in a final digression, we will see another ass and his wife, who have storge, phileo, eros, and agape. Professor Lindvall's Four Loves in One. Thank you very much.
All right, he was pretty quick that time. I don't know what was going on. Usually he's video recorded, I'll have to ask him. So something was going on where they couldn't do that, I guess, that time. So, and the sound was a little bit different. I think, Art, you mentioned it. Hopefully, if you didn't hear anything, you can go back and check online, and hopefully it'll be a little clearer. But the rest of them are fine. Any questions or comments about either the talk or about the book itself? Anything that struck you in your reading? Or... Yes? Yeah. Right. Yeah, thanks. So it is helpful to get some of the, the background, but also the kinds of things that Lewis was used to reading. So, that was his bread and butter, was reading fairy tales and, medieval legends. And so to know that that's what he has in mind primarily when he's using it to create these stories. Because otherwise you could get the wrong impression about some aspects of the stories for sure. Anything else? Jump out. Yes.
It's kind of really difficult to see how much you can pick up and how much you can recognize, and then come and listen to this and find that you only got the tip of the iceberg.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so much there, which is one of the reasons why in that opening dedication he says, I'm writing this to you, and now you're too old to read them, but pretty soon you're going to get old enough to read them again, when in other words, when fairy tales and stories like this can be read for from adults and for great benefit. So it's absolutely true. They are unquestionably good literature, just like Jane Austen and these other works that he mentions. So just like other good literature, the more we read it, the more we change and we see different aspects of it. And even though this is a fire hose and he's giving you tons of information, he's also just scratching the surface. So there's quite a bit of richness there, which is why my kids never tire of them, no matter how many times they hear or read these stories. Any other comments or questions about? Okay, wonderful. Next week, we are on to the silver chair. So this is the most obviously, he deals with issues of Greek philosophy in this one, not to dissuade you from reading it, but there's a lot of symbolism in terms of, the reality and what appears to be reality and what's not. And so the way he does that imaginatively in the story, I think is quite compelling. But silver chair for next week. Thank you very much. Yes?
So next week we also have the building forum.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right.
And so
Thank you for saying that. Next week is not the silver chair. You have 2 weeks to read the silver chair. Next week, Father Edward and John Ike, the chair of the building committee, will be here to do the building committee.
And as I prepare for that forum, do you all have any questions you want to make sure that I respond to? See, this is what you get. You get front row seats, privileged questions by coming to Adult Forum. Nothing's on your mind, nothing in particular you want to hear about? Yes, Art?
Well, we have the big picture.
The big picture.
Because you give photographs and you talk about it. The first question that comes up is the timeline.
Timeline. We have that covered, so as part of the forum next week, you'll hear about permitting and what that looks like. So our architects will actually be with us, or they're slated to be with us, so that's Jan Ward and Will Ward. They're a neat, they're a married couple, but they run an engineering firm. They've been architects for, a good 25, 30 years almost. Lori and Clyde McBride are Jan Ward's mom. So they have a love and care for the parish, which is really neat to both our architects and our general contractor. It's D. Garrett, but Bruce Gilbert is the president who runs our project. they have a deep care for this place, and I think really for you all. They wanted this space to be beautiful. After the Hurricane Ian, Jan and Will Ward were down here the day after, checking out things, and then Bruce was there 2 days later shaking my hand saying it's all going to be okay. We're going to put it back together. So, you know, their love and care for this space on this side, and then also on the other. You know, Bruce and I have walked around this campus many times now, and there was one moment where we were looking at the memorial gardens and talking about them, and with that there was a peal of lightning and it started raining. And Bruce said, I better not walk on this ground ever again. But, you know, there's a deep reverence that they all have for the memorial gardens, for the church, and for everything that's going on. Connie?
Being in this space, will there be some discussion about how we're going to be able to use this space for our church services and how that will be configured?
Not in this forum. I mean, it's not slated to be in this forum. That decision, you know, we'll work on is first clergy, staff, listening and understanding. The idea will be much like we experienced after Ian and after Milton, which is the space will be oriented much the same as you would experience in church, because I don't want there to be a jarring feel of movement. So the layout should be the same. The thing that we're still working on is we'll bring the organ over. So the organ that's over there right now, it's a toaster, or so Tripp calls it. And so we can bring that over. We'll mount the speakers, and hopefully it won't look terrible. And so we will have that same organ music and choir here in this space, not just piano and antique organ, but the full aspect. And then we'll bring in the sound people to temper the volume and everything so it really sounds good. So all that thoughtfulness in making worship in here beautiful and holy, that's all really my job. I mean, that's the number one job of a priest, is to make sure the Sunday liturgy is beautiful. So we'll be working on that. The funniest thing I find about how we use this space as a parish family is I spent extra money on having shades that go up because I thought you all didn't want the distraction of looking out at the water during worship. I thought they really want to focus on what's going on. And every time I put up those shades, someone says, why are you putting up the shades and blocking the view? So we probably will put up the shades a couple of times, just because we might also do a concurrent outside service to keep Rite 3 moving and vibrant as well. So a longer response, but next week we'll really be focused on the building itself and where we are there. It sure might come up. I'm ready. Anything else? All right, so next week is the building forum. Come on and be a part of it. It's, be nice to have as many ears as possible, because it's important for you all to be apprised. It's a special Sunday today. It's a made-up holiday. I made it up. Hymnal Sunday. So today, your bulletins do not have the music printed in them. You have to use your motor skills and look at the blue book in front of you, which is the Hymnal 1982. Now, I think it's fair to say that those hymnals haven't been used in the past 4 years, probably, because all of the hymnals were destroyed in Ian, and we bought all new ones. So they have a nice, crisp feel. So you're going to break them in a little bit, which is good. For those of you who aren't accustomed to being in the hymnal, it is a really neat book and part of the devotional liturgical resources we have as Episcopalians. If you look at the table of contents sometimes, especially when that sermon is boring, you can see that it is actually patterned in a beautiful way, starting with morning prayer, the daily offices, and then you get into hymns based on the seasons of the year, and then into the sacraments, so Holy Eucharist, baptism, ordination. So I always like opening up the prayer book and going to the back and reading through all of the prayers. But some of you might like opening up the hymnals and finding a favorite hymn as you're waiting for service to begin. The poetry is beautiful. The theology is meaningful. The other thing about the hymnal that you should know is if ever there is a hymn that starts and you're like, where is that? There's a first line context in the back. So you can look up the first line and flip to the appropriate number in the hymnal. The final neat piece, and this is for the experts among you. So in the service leaflets every Sunday when we do print the music, we print the first line, and then over on the right-hand side is something in italics, and that is called the tune, the hymn tune. And so sometimes it's used for various different hymns, sometimes just for that hymn. One of the favorite hymn tunes that we all have is Old 100th. I won't spoil it by singing that right now. But we wanted to, trips away, we have Dr. Sarah here, so we thought it would be a fun time to open up the hymnal and see how you all do. It's a little bit competitive, I will say. The 7:30 service did a really good job. They only sing one hymn, but they did really well. The 9 o'clock service did great on the entrance. The communion hymn, they kind of forgot to open up their hymnals. So I'm relying on you to break open the hymnals throughout the service.